Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we are once again doing my favorite thing in the game as far as PvE is concerned, and that is a challenge tournament. This time it is going to be the Corrupted Alliance versus the Ice Golem. For those who don't know, the Corrupted Alliance is a group of factions, namely the Demon Spawn, Undead Hordes, Dark Elves, and Knights Revenant. So the way this tournament works is that you can do any stage of the Ice Golem, but all members of the team, including food champions if you're doing some sort of solo strategy, must be from these four factions, the Corrupted Alliance. The tournament is not yet live, so we don't have an exact idea of what the rewards are going to be, but based on history, it could be a Void Shard, it could be some Immortal or Eternal Soul Essence, or anything of that ilk. And of course, if you're in the top 3 or 4, then you have a chance to get some amazing Relentless gear. Now, Ice Golem is generally considered to be the worst dungeon to farm because of all of the basic sets, which don't give a ton of silver, and also these premium sets that just don't offer the most utility compared to the other dungeons. However, I think there is a lot of value in Provoke, Reflex. The buffed in Retaliation is quite useful, and a little bit of resistance doesn't hurt. So they're not the strongest sets in the game, but well, some of them are, but they're not the best collection of sets overall. So point being, Ice Golem is fairly unpopular, so if you're looking to participate in something just before the fusion starts, this might be the thing to work on. It's also worth noting that Ice Golem itself is going to be double points if you run it during CVC, which starts tomorrow as well. But I can totally see the argument where you want to skip this event and just focus on hoarding your resources for the upcoming fusion. If we talk about stage optimization, I do not recommend trying to do this on hard mode because you have a very limited pool of accessible champions in order to follow the rules of the tournament. So I would definitely recommend sticking with normal mode. And within normal mode, even though it might be possible to crank out a team for stage 24, 25, don't be afraid to drop back down to stage 20 if you can farm that faster and safer, because that is still the best points per energy spent, particularly for temporary or short-term tournaments just like this one. And if you're earlier in the game, then make your way to stage 16 if you can, because that's void and it's just much easier to do, and you still have the chance to get some 6-star gear. So for myself, I am going to be running stage 24 because I have been relatively lucky lately. So you can see my team here. We have Walking Tomb Drang, we have Calvalax, we have Theodore, we have Dark Gale, and we have our protector in Wither the Crowned. Don't worry if you can't build a team exactly like this, but the core of the team is what is really important here. So we have a slew of poisoners here to help us deal with the waves as well as the boss. We have some HP burn just to kind of deal a little bit more damage to the boss. This is not hard mode, so poisons do work, but in HP burns are a little bit less effective, but it's just extra damage that I didn't really have another poisoner in these factions. And of course it is Ice Golem, so there's always the risk of him doing something crazy with a random retaliation or a big crit, and so we do have Wither the Crown in there, just kind of the protection champion. For my main Ice Golem team, I use Pythion, who's basically unkillable because he's just tanky enough to tank the hits, bring his health back with regen, and then revive the rest of the team. But he doesn't fit into the faction category, so we settled on someone else who can kind of do the job. So since this is a bit of a quicker run, somewhere in the 2-minute-ish range, I can go ahead and run this for you guys so you can see it in action. But you can kind of see what's going to happen here. It's pretty straightforward. We're just going to kind of poison the waves and then kind of activate them with Theodore, a little bit of HP burn as well, and then Wither the Crown's not going to do much. Dark Gale is really, I think, underrated as far as one of the Doom Tower epics in the game, because he does have the really unique ability to extend the duration of all debuffs, but with the addition of also placing decrease attack on the same ability, which is a very strong thing. And so he is our decrease attack champion when we get to wave 3 on the Ice Golem, but he also extends all the poisons and all the HP burns and everything else that we're setting up on the waves, so he can really just amplify the damage we do over time, because essentially we just need to pop as many poisons as possible and the HP burns, and then the waves will slowly just tick themselves to death. So definitely using Theodore a lot here because he can activate them and they increases the duration so they don't deplete. And then we kind of just burn, or pop. There we go. So we're on to the wave and on to wave 3, the boss phase, in about a minute or so. So we have it speed tuned such that we still have all of our poison abilities back, and then we set up with Dark Gale to start with the A2 again, so that we have decrease attack. And essentially now it's just a waiting game of eventually we're just going to keep activating poisons, activating burns. So we have Drang, who can activate burns on the A1. Dark Gale can do the same thing. He can activate 2 poisons or poison and an HP burn on the A1. And then Theodore, of course, has the chemistry ability where he can activate all poisons, or activate 1 turn of poisons or 1 tick of poisons and 1 tick of HP burn. So usually this team finishes in just under 2 minutes, like I said. So it's a pretty fast team. It would probably be a little bit faster if we had a certain someone who we'll talk about later when we talk about substitutions. But the point is, it's just kind of a poison comp, and they just kind of work their way through the waves. Ice Golem takes 1 turn, And then that's basically the end of the run. As usual, let's go through the builds on these champions so you guys can understand the context for how they work. Theodore, I do have him built in a double perception and resistance set, so he is a mix of high resistance as well as high accuracy. I was experimenting with him on hard mode, and so that's why his stats are so high, but that team ended up not being 100%, so basically he's just back to normal mode Ice Golem, or anywhere I kind of need him. Spider's Den as well, hard mode. So 63k on the HP, 3000 on the defense, 242 on the speed, 455 on the resistance, and 377 on the accuracy. And as you can see for the blessing, I was fortunate somehow to get a blessing. I mean, I've had the blessing for him for a while, long before I pulled him, but I do have 4-star, and I did go with Brimstone, so we do have an extra 6000 HP as well as the 50 accuracy. The only other thing to note that's kind of cool is that he does have a refresh ring on, so 5% chance, but every once in a while we can kind of get a back-to-back HP burn, poison activation, so that's kind of cool. Next up, we have Walking Tomb Drang, who I have in a Relentless and a Speed set, and he's built for PvE as well, Hydra, and a couple of some Doom Tower bosses as well. 65,000 on the HP, 3,000 on defense, kind of a similar to Theodore, surprisingly. 252 on the speed, we don't care about the crit rate, crit damage, and I just built him with resistance, because why not? He doesn't need accuracy to place the HP burn or activate it. Before I get too far, let me remember to talk about the masteries. As you can see here for Theodore, I don't have them completed, but I do plan to work my way down as your standard debuffer route, and I do plan to end on Oppressor actually, so he gets a little bit more turn meter fill rate because of all of the poisons and debuffs he's going to be placing. It doesn't really make sense to go down to War Master because 2 of his abilities don't even attack, and so you're not going to get that much utility. And again, he's primarily going to be used for Ice Golem as well as the Spider's Den, both of which 1 or 0 attacks is not really going to make a difference on the speed of the run. Walking Tomb Drang, however, I did go down to War Master here, so you can see that tier 6 on War Master, and then we stopped at Retribution because the counterattacking after he places the HP burn sometimes can be pretty handy just to get a bit of an extra activation, and I didn't see the reason to get the last tier 5. Next champion on the team is of course Kavlax, who's primarily in there just for the passive. He doesn't really do anything, but I do have him built because he is on my Spider team that is currently being revamped with Newt coming into the mix starting tomorrow with CVC. As you can see here, I built him like a nuker, so really low on the HP, only 26,000. I mean, his base is ridiculously low to be fair, but I didn't try to scale that up at all. 4.5k on the attack, 229 on the speed, full crit rate, 251 on the crit damage, and 355 on the accuracy. It's worth noting here that my Kavlax is still unbooked. I did book out Theodore because again, I wanted to use him for Ice Golem and he needs to cycle his abilities properly, so I did make sure to book him out. But Kavlax, it remains unbooked, and again, we're just mainly using him in there for the passive masteries. We got all the way down to Flawless Execution for a little bit more crit damage as far as using his A3 ability, and he's still in work, but I do plan to finish it off with Sniper and Master Hexer. Next up, we do have Dark Kale, who you guys have probably seen many times on the channel, but he is in a Relentless set and Perception. We look at his total stats. We have 43k on the HP, 3000 on the attack, 2.4k on the defense, 241 on the speed, full crit rate for the A2 because it has to crit in order to extend the duration of debuffs, and then 371 on the accuracy. We take a look at his masteries, as you might suspect, because he does have a triple hitter on the A1. We went all the way down to Giant Slayer, and of course we're going for Master Hexer and Sniper to increase the chance of the A1 activating the poisons and or HP burns. And lastly, we have Wither the Crowned, who is primarily there to just take the brunt of a Retribution hit with the Guardian set on, but no, that's not her purpose. But I do have her in a Guardian set, and ideally I'd like her in a Retaliation set. I do plan to use her for Arena, namely Tag Team Arena, so that's why she's in this build. So in order to take a bit of damage off some other people and also just be the annoying healer that she is. So we have 75k on the HP, and do note that her gloves, which are HP percentage, are not maxed out. They're not 16 because I'm hoping to get a Retaliation set 2-piece to finish that out, but she should probably be somewhere around 80-ish thousand HP total, to 2300 on the defense, 229 on the speed, and then 438 on the resistance. Her masteries are incomplete at the moment because she is relatively new on the account and she's in the queue, but I probably will end up coming all the way down to Unshakable for the extra resistance, and then kind of following the healer Lasting Gifts support tree. So of course, I do understand that a lot of you can't replicate my team exactly, and so we're going to talk about some of the champions that will be good for this style of tournament. A couple of disclaimers are that despite being a free-to-play player as well as a free-to-play channel, that does not mean that no legendaries will be showcased as far as recommendations for team comps, because even if you're free-to-play like myself, you will eventually get some legendaries on your account. Not all of them will be useful, but you will get some of them, so you may or may not have them unless it is valid to talk about them. The other disclaimer is the format that we've settled into for this style of video. So we are going to talk about our DPS champions, namely the HP burners and poisoners that are applicable to this type of tournament. We're going to talk about debuffers, the ones you can use to debuff the waves if you want to go that route. And of course, we're going to talk about supports to help keep your team running or keep them alive. I will be skipping the nuker category because I do trust you guys to figure out who you have on your account in these particular factions who can nuke the waves if you do need that. So let's kick things off with the applicable HP burners and poisoners that you guys can use if you happen to have them. So starting with the demon spawn, the first champion to mention is of course Tyrant Exilmore, who I also do happen to have, but he does have this ability here, which is a 3-turn cooldown with a 3-turn duration on HP burn. Once again, HP burn is not the strongest way to kill the Ice Golem on normal mode. It is the only way to kill him on hard mode, but nonetheless, HP burn does a lot of damage because there are minions, there are waves, and so you will get the benefit of having HP burn if you don't have a bunch of poisoners stacked. In a similar vein, but a much slower burner, you do have Drexthar Bloodtwin, who can do the job of, with his passive, of taking hit, or when he takes hits, he can place burns on the enemies. It's slower because they have to take a turn to hit him, and generally speaking, we run our dungeon teams relatively quickly, or dungeon champions relatively quickly, so he's not the most optimal, but nonetheless, if he's all you have, then he can definitely do some of the work to help. But HP burns on the waves. There is Sissia Flametongue, who does have the ability to place a HP burn as well as activate them, kind of like Theodore, so she's a great option, again, if you want to go the route of placing HP burns. And then if we're continuing on the trend of HP burners, you do have a Koth the Seared, who's a Doom Tower Epic, who's more accessible, I should say, than all the legendaries, and he has the ability to place it if there's a bunch of targets alive. A cool honorable mention in the faction is actually Urdakata, who I do not have yet, but she does have this cool ability on her passive here, where if an ally lands a crit hit on an enemy under Hex, and she does have Hex in her kit, although it's a 4 times at random, so it might not actually land on the Ice Golem himself if you get unlucky. But essentially, you can have a team that just has critical crit rate, and they can place poisons by just attacking. And so it's a roundabout way to get poisons on the Ice Golem potentially if you want to run her with her passive. Switching to the Undead Horde, we have of course Crypt King Grawl, or CKG. He does have the AoE HP burn here, but he also does have a cool freeze ability that resets the duration, I guess, of HP burn. So he can be CC as well as AoE HP burn. And of course, we'd be remiss to not mention the infamous BEK, or Bada Khazar, who does have the poison and the cleanse, so he's an excellent poisoner, and he's one of the champions who's definitely capable of soloing stage 24 or stage 25, I should say, for affinity reasons. And so he can definitely work, but again, if you are running a solo champion, you do need to make sure that the food is also within the 4 factions, or else it won't count towards the tournament. For the Dark Elves, she is technically a nuker in this context, but nonetheless she does have poisons on her A2, and of course she can detonate poisons, so if I had my dream girl, my team would be even better for stage 25 potentially, and I could just kind of blow up the waves and reset with a Renegade, who's also in the faction we'll talk about in a bit. So I wish I had her specifically for stuff like this, because she'd definitely be fun to use. But anyways, so Xavia does play some poison, then she can also do poison activation, so she can blow up the waves and you can kind of speed farm it, because Seer is not in the factions for this tournament. The rest are all the versions of Kale. So Supreme Kale has an AoE poison here on his A2 if you're lucky enough to have Supreme Kale. Most of us probably don't. Dark Kale we already saw on my team, but he does have poison on the A3. I didn't need to use it because I do have Theodore, who places this essentially but on an AoE, so it's kind of redundant. And then, of course, if you're in the earlier game, then Kale is your man, because he still has poisons here on the A3 and the A2 as well, and he can be a wave nuker as well. So if you're working towards that stage 16, then normal Kale, starter Kale, definitely the way to go if you want to get points in this tournament. For the Knights Rev, he wasn't featured in this team, but Tomb Lord is, of course, one of the best AoE poisoners in the game. With his ability here on the A2, he can place up to 4 poisons as long as he crits. Theodore, Calblex, and Drang were already on my team, so you kind of understand what they do. But I do want to take this moment to talk to Plarium if they're watching this, which they're totally not. But I think it's time to buff Narma the Returned, because she does have this ability, which is really cool, Theodore-esque, but it's a single target on a 4-turn cooldown. So if we can have a Theodore in the game, I think she deserves to have an AoE poison with poison sensitivity. Just saying. So if they're watching, please give her a buff. She's definitely underwhelming in today's day and age. For the debuffers, obviously I did not use any in my composition. I just kind of, like I said, stacked a bunch of poisoners together, and that's enough to deal damage on the waves. But if you don't have that luxury, then having some sort of wave clear DPS is definitely the way to go. So for the demon spawn, Sissia does have decreased defense and weaken. If you don't have her, then on the epic category, you do have Gorelos Helma, who doesn't have it on a 3-turn cooldown, 100% chance to place decreased defense. He is attack based, so you're gonna have to find some way to keep him alive, but he is good at affinity for stage 20 and stage 25. For the undead hordes, you do have the previous fusion of Vlad, so if you are using him for other content, or it's just kind of laying around, it is a 75% chance to land decreased defense and block active skills when unbooked, which is probably good enough for, again, a temporary tournament just like this if you don't have books to put in him, but he can definitely do the job as a void affinity, so any stage will work as far as placing decreased defense on the waves, and a little bit of CC as well. Jumping over to the Dark Elves, there is of course Ghostborn, who has the irresistible decreased defense with increased attack, so he's really good for activating Seer, but of course she's not in the applicable factions. If you completed Faction Wars, then you will have Lydia, and she does have the decreased defense and weaken AoE, but she does also have the ability to block at least the first revival or one revival of the minions, so that can be nice to have if you're struggling with having to always kill the minions, wasting a bunch of time. And of course, while being unideal for dungeons as far as animation time and stuff like that, Madame Ceres, or cooldown as well, Madame Ceres can technically be your debuffer because she does have decreased defense and decreased attack. For the Knights Revenant, we already talked about Tomb Lord, but he does also have decreased attack, decreased defense on a 4-turn cooldown. And the other one to mention, of course, is Thylesia, who does have decreased defense on a 3-turn cooldown, but it does not have to be booked to maximize the chance of doing so. Oh, sorry, the A3 here, sorry. It does not need to be booked to maximize the chance of placing the decreased defense, but you will want to book it if you do want the 3-turn cooldown. For the supports, going back into the top of the order for the demon spawn, obviously Prince Kymar, because he can reset abilities as well as do a little bit of CC for the wave. So if you have some sort of speed running comp, poison activation, etc., then Kymar is definitely the way to go. We saw Wither the Crowned on my team. Of course, Duchess Lil 2 is the ultimate PvE champion if you use her for that, because she can basically never die and she'll always be there to revive your team. Elikath can kind of do something similar, where you can put your team under block damage and the big shield, unless you will be less likely to be one-shot by the Ice Golem. For Undead Hordes, a little bit unpopular of a champion, but technically Skartorsis does have a full cleanse on the A3, so if you're worried about getting frozen or the hero reduction decreased defense on the boss stage and you happen to have Skartorsis, he can definitely do that job. And he does have a pretty massive heal, so kind of like a Wither the Crowned, but a lot worse probably. But he also has an AoE on the A1, so he can be cool in a stun set, but he can also steal some buffs on the A1 as well. Honorable mention to Ultimate Death Knight, because I do know that he was somewhat popular in the early stages of as being a toxic champion who could solo the Ice Golem, so if you definitely want to whip that back out, you can definitely do that job as he's done it in the past. For the Dark Elves, of course, we have Mithrala Lifebane, because she has poison of the A1, so she can be an auxiliary poisoner, but of course she has the soft CC of the Petrification as well as the full cleanse, again for the decreased defense heal reduction and freezes on the boss phase. Albeit a less potent champion, definitely Blind Seer. If you do happen to have her, she does have block debuffs and a big shield on the A2, so you can kind of block some of the debuffs from the minions on wave 3 or the boss phase, and she also does have this pretty weak sauce but still decent revive on a 5-turn cooldown. Continuing it on the reviver theme, we do have Caden as well, who does have this 2-turn or 2 ally revival with increased defense, so they don't immediately die when they get hit by something else. And of course we have to mention Painkeeper, because she does have the single turn reset of all ally skills by 1 turn, which can be quite useful again if you're running some sort of speed comp where you need to reset the ability of your champions. Last up, we do have the Knights Revenant, and I honestly want to shout out Erix, who kind of does what Skartorsis does on the A1, but probably a bit better as a champion overall, so she can remove random buffs on an AoE. She also has a full stun, so a great CC champion if you want to control the waves. Specifically, the Terror Beasts on stage 20 can be very, very annoying with that reflect damage. Obviously, you have to be very, very late in the game to have her, but if you are at that stage, then she's a great option. She can also protect your team on the boss stage, so with the ally protection and counterattack, then she can just kind of keep slapping, and maybe if you put her, I run her in lifesteal on my account, so you can put her in a set like that where she can counterattack and kind of heal herself back up. It's funny to consider him an honorable mention in context, but nonetheless, a lot of people probably won't have him. But Solus does have the Dark Kael-esque ability here to extend or increase the duration of all debuffs on the target on an AoE, so he can technically do that job, albeit Dark Kael is much more accessible and easier to get and use. One of the old school staples of Ice Golem was of course Miscreated Monster, who does have the big shield with the stun cooldown chance on the A2 as well as the ally protection, although most of the time that just gets him killed. But nonetheless, he can help protect your team, and if you can pick him back up, then he can kind of keep doing that job as well. And speaking of picking people back up, we also have Record Wrath, who is a very, very solid healer and solid support, and they did actually not buffer, I guess they fixed her, so her animations are a lot faster with her passive, so she does not really slow down your runs as much as she used to. And of course, we have to drop down to the rares to talk about Renegade, who is the slightly better version of Painkeeper as far as resetting, but not as good as a Kymar. So on a 5-turn cooldown, she can reduce the cooldown of ally skills by 2 turns. So again, if you're running some sort of speed comp, poison explosion, then she's definitely the one to use if you don't have a Kymar. Alrighty, so that's going to do it for today's video. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below if you guys are going to participate in this tournament just before the fusion, and do let me know what team you're going to run, because I'm always curious what you guys come up with. As always, if you found this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below, and if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below as well. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.